Hello and welcome to episode 55 of the Ohio Huntsman Podcast. And on today's show, I really think you're going to like this one. I really enjoyed recording it. I learned a lot, and we talk about taxidermy. So basically everything you need to know to get a good mount and keep it looking good for years to come. So pre-planning, things you need to take into consideration before you even go into the woods, how to get your deer out of the woods safely without damaging the cape, how to get it to the taxidermist, things that you should be considering when picking a mount or how you want the ears positioned, all of that stuff. And then, like I said, how to keep it looking good for years and years and years, because it's all about the memory, right? Taxidermy is about preserving that memory and sort of reliving that hunt or that moment or that season every time you look at that mount. And so you want to keep it looking good for years and years and years. So like I said, I really enjoyed this one. This will be a good one to listen to now as we're going into season, and even refer back to in years to come, right? If you didn't get a deer, you don't have any taxidermy yet, come back to this one next season, or refer your friends to it if they're new to taxidermy. Or even if they're not new to taxidermy, I think there's content in here that is valuable to everybody. I mean, unless you're a taxidermist and you already know all of this, or you've got tons of taxidermy and you've got a good taxidermist that's already told you all of this. If that's the case, then maybe there's nothing in here for you other than the good stories. But like I said, I really learned a lot, and hopefully you guys are going to learn a lot as well. So before we get into that, I want to talk about Monster Whitetail Grub. I really appreciate them sponsoring this podcast. It means a lot to us. It helps us bring you guys these episodes, continue to bring you guys these episodes. And I actually just got back from one of the properties that I hunt, and I cleared out, there's an old blind there, an old elevated blind there, and so it had been grown up in brush and everything, and I cleared that out because my plan is I'm going to take my 3, soon-to-be 4-year-old daughter with me hunting. She's super excited to go hunting this fall. I know it's not going to be a, quote, real hunt, right? That's not what it's about. It's about getting her outside. But even if we could see a deer, that would be awesome. So my plan is to take some Monster Whitetail Grub deer feed out there a little bit before we plan to go out. I'm going to take her out there early season before it gets too terribly cold. And I'm going to use this Monster Whitetail Grub to try and get some deer in front of the blind so she can at least see a deer, and maybe if by some stroke of luck she lasts long enough out there for a deer to come by and we get a shot at it, that would be super cool. So I'm going to use Monster Whitetail Grub because, one, we've had really good success with the feed. It's not just corn. It does have some corn in it, but it's like a texturized feed, right? So there's pelletized feed in there, there's corn, you can have additives like peanuts added into it, as well as like what I call a long-range attractant flavoring. So there's a bunch of different flavors. There's persimmon, there's white oak acorn, apple, I think there's a blackberry, lots of different flavors, and that sort of acts as a long-range attractant. And then the other thing it has is mineral in the feed. And so the mineral works down into the soil, and it keeps the deer coming back even after the physical feed is gone. So I'm going to use it this season to, like I said, try to get a deer in front of the blind with my daughter, and it'll be her first time out there. So hopefully Monster Whitetail Grub can help us make that happen. And now we're going to talk taxidermy. And like I said, there's a lot of good information in there. And a little sneak peek, Dustin, who is the taxidermist that we interview on this one, gives us a, what do I want to call it? Like a pro tip or a industry trade secret. Maybe that's what I want to call it. A trade secret on how to keep your taxidermy looking fresh and revitalize it, or revitalize old mounts. And so he divulges a product in this one that they use, and that alone is worth the price of admission. I did put a link in the show notes to that product to make it easy for you guys to find, so stay tuned. We're going to get into the episode right now. Welcome to the Ohio Huntsman Podcast, where three brothers, Jason, Jacob, and Jeff, discuss all things hunting in Ohio. Our goal is to be your source for accurate and reliable hunting news and conservation issues in the great state of Ohio, as well as some fun and interesting conversations along the way. This is the Ohio Huntsman Podcast.
Are you listening?
All right, on today's show, we've got Dustin Kisamore of Back to Nature Taxidermy. And I want to start off by thanking you for taking time out of your schedule to jump on the podcast and talk to us. I suspect this is probably the calm before the storm. I don't know how, I guess there's seasons opened in other states, but here in Ohio, we're anxiously waiting on season to open. So
yes,
thank you.
We certainly are. Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Like you and I had discussed previously, it's just, this is something I like to talk about with guys because I just don't feel like it's a topic that is really out there in a lot of different ways. And, we get so many customers come into our shop, and I'm sure this is universal, throughout the state, the country, anywhere where guys like to have their deer mounted for the wall that, you just don't think about prior to the hunt. What happens if you get that trophy down that, you want to immortalize on the wall? And there are so many things that, you as the hunter can do to maximize the potential of your shoulder mount, make it look as good as possible before it ever even gets to the taxidermist, that, it's just something that I think that guys could benefit from. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you reaching out to us with this, because I agree. I know this happened to me in 2017. We got drawn for a parks hunt, shot a really good buck, and then it was like, now what? I've never had a taxidermy mount done, so this is sort of near and dear to my heart. And so for the listeners, basically we're going to go through from the pro's point of view, what are some best practices for handling your taxidermy or handling your deer in the field to maximize your taxidermy output, your outcome. And just sort of set you up for success with your mount. So to get started, I guess, let's talk about why people get a mount. What are some reasons that people decide, you know what, I'm going to have a mount, whether it's a shoulder mount, a full body mount? Like, why do people decide they want to get some taxidermy?
Well, this is, it's an interesting point, because I think that a lot of people out there, particularly new hunters or, maybe even more experienced, but, we see what media puts out, and it's all about these big giant deer that celebrity hunters on TV kill, and inches of antler is the single most important thing, or maturity level. The deer has to be a certain age, and I think that gives a lot of people a false impression of what a trophy truly is. And we tell every one of our customers that come through our shop that is in the eyes of the beholder. There are several reasons why you would want to get a deer mounted, or why you should be proud to put it on your wall. And that doesn't just necessarily mean that it is a big buck. The personal accomplishment of killing your first deer. I would love to tell you how many button bucks we have done for just, young kids that it's their first year, or a woman that goes out and you know what? They make beautiful shoulder mounts. They really do. And if there's, if it's got that sentiment to the individual, and it has that, it was your jump into hunting, the first deer you killed with a longbow, there are just a myriad of reasons that it is a personal accomplishment that, that you would want to get one. So that's one reason.
Well, and I think, I guess to jump in here, I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because that word trophy, right? That has a lot of sub connotation, especially with the non-hunting public, right? And so I think it's important to point that out. A trophy is in the eye of the beholder. You could not even get a deer or get an animal, but it could be just a trophy experience, right? It was just something about that hunt or that trip that was, now that doesn't lead to taxidermy, but
just talking about that word trophy, right? There's
Yes.
It's more than just I think there's this sometimes this sentiment in the non-hunting public that trophy hunting is this evil thing where you just want the antlers or the horns and everything else is left to rot, and that's not the case at all.
Right. Absolutely not. And as you get more experience in it, obviously a bigger animal, as we know, and most of the listeners do that, have hunted for a while, there's a certain level of difficulty that comes with killing a bigger buck or an older buck or one that's, managed to elude someone for so long. So that in itself is what makes it the trophy. So the size is a byproduct of the level of difficulty of the hunt. So for people that don't understand what a trophy is, there's so much more behind it, as you had just stated. But like you had talked about the story, being out there, having the experience, that could be something else that could also lead to a mount. If this is a hunt that, say, you took with your grandpa who's in his 80s, as mine is, and he doesn't have much more time, or maybe he hasn't been out in a few years, and you get to go do something like that, share it with one of your kids for the first time, or, there's something like that goes with, that sense of personal accomplishment that adds to the story. And when you have that hanging on the wall, I mean, we have done literally thousands of shoulder mounts, and I have probably a dozen or so of my own bucks, but every single one that I can sit at any given time and look at that mount, and every single detail of that hunt just comes flooding back to you when you look at it. And it enhances the experience and keeps it fresh in your mind basically forever. And that's an important aspect of it.
Yeah. We actually just lost our grandfather.
I did too.
What was it, Jeff? 2 weeks ago now?
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I think it's 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. And we hunt out at his farm. And so when you mentioned that, it was like, boy, that, we've been chasing some deer out there and never really, connected with anything, but there's like this, I don't know, added sentiment this year to spend time out at Grandpa's farm. And if one of us would be lucky enough to get a deer out there, I would imagine it's going to lead to some sort of mount because of that.
Right,
there'll
absolutely
be that emotional, right. That was the year that Grandpa passed away. And it'll, like you said, it'll sort of immortalize that memory, that time and that place,
Yes. So. Yes, for sure. Yep. A great reason. And it doesn't have to be the biggest buck on the farm or the best one, that you've ever taken. It's just the fact that you're out there and you're doing that and you have that memory, and it just, it all adds to an experience. And, to have that, like I said, on the wall, it keeps the memory fresh. It keeps it alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we sort of covered, a lot there on why you would get a mount, right? That there's history there. There's some sort of emotion there. Like I said, that deer I got in 2017, that we would never have forgotten that hunt, even without the mount. But like we had a hellacious drag on that deer about killed us. We, looking back, we probably should have quartered that deer up in the woods. Yeah. It was Parks hunt. We weren't sure if we were allowed to do that. It was, so it about killed us. But now every time I walk by that deer, I just remember that, like it was brutal, right. But so it's taxidermy is one of those things that, again, like the non-hunting public, they might look at it and go, boy, that's a weird thing that hunters do. But to us hunters, right, it's special. It's a memory. It's a way to remember that experience, that animal, whatever it is. And they just look.
And that brings to mind a story of, we don't really do it anymore, but, we used to do trade shows. We would do like the Deer and Turkey Expo. We had a booth down there one year, and one year we did our local county fair, which obviously is not entirely a group of hunters. And a woman, as she walked by, her comment was, "Oh, what a lovely wall of death." And my response to her was, no, this is a wall of life. This is celebrating the life of an animal that lived its life as it was supposed to. You know, it wasn't raised in a pen for the purpose of being consumed. This deer, or, you know, it lived its life as a deer is supposed to, and it died the life that a deer is supposed to. So, you know, this is a celebration of life, at least in my perspective. You know, I mean, I think it's a positive way to look at it, and that's what it is. I mean, you're immortalizing the animal that otherwise would just fade into obscurity in the natural environment. And I think that's, you know, that's something great that we can do as human beings if we're going to go down this road of being outdoorsmen, which obviously I have every intention of doing.
Yeah. Jeff, were you going to say something there?
Well, I was just going to say, I never really thought about it, but it is, to an outsider, it probably is pretty weird putting, you know, a dead animal on the wall. Like, I never really thought about it.
Right.
And, you know, to someone who isn't used to it, it is kind of weird. Why would you want dead things in your house?
Yeah, for sure. I would agree. I mean, you know, there are things that, you know, just the perspective of an anti-hunter. That's something that I will never understand. I can respect it. I absolutely can. And I would, you know, just hope for the same courtesy from someone on the other side of the fence, which, you know, we don't necessarily always see, but but like I said, I mean, it's just, you know, it's just a different way of looking at things. And like I said, I wouldn't give up any of my shoulder mounts for anything in the world. You know, they're very prized possessions to me, obviously, because of all of the reasons that we earlier mentioned. And it doesn't have anything to do with the size of the antlers. It's more about the memories, the experiences, and, you know, a way to look at that.
Yeah. Okay. So from there, I want to talk about pre-planning the hunt, right? Because like I said, I was unprepared in my scenario, right? So, you know, we may have done a number of things wrong. So maybe you can tell us where we went wrong, where we went right, and things that you should be thinking about before the hunt. So when you're looking for a taxidermist, you know, maybe you don't have one specifically picked out per se, but what should people be looking for when they're looking for a taxidermist?
Okay. You know, this is a good thing to do beforehand. Obviously, guys don't want to, you know, be presumptive and think, oh, I'm going to go out there and kill that trophy deer. I don't want to sound overconfident. I don't want to look at this, but, you know, I think we've all got kids, and obviously you knew who the doctor was going to be in the delivery room long before that child was born. So this is kind of like a similar type of thing. You know, if you're going to hunt and you ever think that there's a potential that you would want to put a deer on the wall, then it's probably a good idea that you get an idea of who you think that you might want to take that deer to, you know, well before you even maybe set foot in the woods on that hunt, or you even know that deer exists that you want to put on the wall. And as far as finding the right taxidermist, I think that the things that would probably the best to look at would be, one, location. You know, you might not want to drive clear across the state to find a taxidermist, because I'll be the first to admit there are plenty of us out there, and, you know, several are just as good as the next, you know. And the way you can look at that is there are organizations out there. There's the Professional Taxidermists of Ohio. There's the Ohio Taxidermists Association, and they have competitions. So there are awards that exist out there that, you know, you could do your research and you could find that if this person is at a competition level, which might be something that you want. You know, another thing is word of mouth. If a guy is good, then, you know, your fellow hunters are going to talk about that guy and they're going to recommend that guy. And I think that might be one of the most valuable pieces of information that you can use, is if you have a buddy that has got 4 or 5 heads on the wall and consistently kills the type of deer that he wants to put on the wall, he's not going to take him to a cut rate guy a second time if he's not happy with the work. So if he's consistently using the same taxidermist, then that might be somebody that you want to look at. And then, you know, finally is what is in your budget. But, you know, I would use caution there, because there on both ends of the spectrum. There could be somebody that is just charging a ridiculously high amount that doesn't necessarily put out the quality of work, or there might be somebody that is, a discount taxidermist, but their work might reflect that. So, those are all just things that you want to kind of keep in mind. And like I said, that's something that you should probably do well beforehand so that you have an idea who you need to contact should you have the type of success that you're looking for.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. When you're like, I'm going to use the word interviewing a taxidermist, is there questions you should be asking? Like, I don't know, about what process they use, or, is there questions you should be asking?
In the past, there have been preservation methods of the hides that maybe weren't quite as good as other ones, and I'm gonna throw this out there. There's the actual full-on liquid tanning of a hide, and then there's also a type of powder preservative, a dry preservative that taxidermists use. And in the past, there was kind of a stigma against that powder, but that's not something that you need to be concerned with anymore, because it's like anything else. The technology has advanced so far that in itself isn't something. Maybe if you're going to go look at their work, take a look at some of the mounts, ask how old they are. I know for one, in our shop, we've been doing this for 25 years now, I think. And it's a family business. My parents started it. They still work on it. I work to help them. And, we have shoulder mounts in our showroom that are 25 years old that I would give anybody a free shoulder mount if they could come in and pick out which one was the oldest one, because you want, obviously this is something that you want to last as long as it possibly can. So see how long they've been in the business, see how roughly how many deer they do, ask about turnaround time, see how long they're going to have your mount or how long they're going to have your deer. Questions like that are going to give you an idea of if they are keeping customers satisfied, if they're doing repeat business. If they're not doing that many deer, or it's taking them a long time to get them back to the guys, then, there might be an issue there. But it also might be that they only want to do a fewer and they want to do a really quality job on them. So those are just the kind of things that you want to feel out, as you're talking to them.
Okay. So let's say we've got a taxidermist in mind now. We've taken that advice. We've done some pre-screening. We've got an idea. So now, as far as the hunt goes, what are some things that you need to be taking into consideration when, before you step foot into the woods to go hunt, as far as preparation for if you were to get a deer down?
Right. Okay. Now this is where the real bread and butter of the conversation is going to take place, because this is how you're going to get the best looking mount, how you can take the best care of your deer. But I will backtrack for a second and say, let's go back to that last step, and you've picked out that taxidermist. The tips that I'm going to give are, general, and I think any taxidermist would probably be on board with them. But if you have one picked out and you're getting ready to go, then maybe it's time to ask them what they personally would prefer, so that they have the best product that they want to work with. But I think that the tips that I have come up with and, the ideas that I've looked at are going to generally be accepted by just about anybody, because it's just about taking good care of the animal.
Okay.
So
that's good advice, though. Talk to the guy that you're actually going to be having doing the work. So that's good advice.
For sure. So, okay, so now moving forward, let's say we're getting ready to go out on a hunt, and, one of the first things we need to look at, of course, is, what time of the season is the hunt that we're going on? Is this going to be an early season hunt where it has the potential to be 80 degrees out during the day? Are we going to be in camp for 3 or 4 days, or are we just going down for the afternoon? Is it a late season where this deer has the potential to freeze solid while we're out there? These are all things that we need to think about before we go, and then we're going to have to plan according to that. Probably one of the biggest issues is, obviously with a problem that we would have would be warm weather. A warm gun season can ruin a lot of deer, and, an early season buck that we get in, just a few days without being properly cared for, and the hide could potentially be ruined. And, that's going to ruin your mount. So if we're packing for a hunt that we're going to be out for a few days or it's exceptionally warm, one of the biggest things, this is probably like the single biggest thing that we push on guys, is if you're taking a cooler with you and you have space in that cooler, you have the opportunity to do it beforehand. Instead of buying bags of ice, fill gallon jugs, like milk jugs, just buy water, whatever, and freeze it at home in a freezer so that you have a block of sealed ice to take with you. For one, block ice doesn't have the surface area of a bag of ice, so it's not going to thaw as quickly, and it's self-contained, so the water is not going to leak out. So let's say you've got a buck on the ground, or a deer for that matter. You know, we mount those too. They're all trophies, like we discussed. Yep. Subjective to the hunter. And you think you're going to want to get it mounted. Obviously, it's warm out. You get it field dressed as quickly as possible. You put that block ice in that deer that's contained. Now, you don't have that water leaking out into the inside of the animal. You know, any type of animal's cells on the cellular level are going to absorb water. So we have seen so many deer that guys will shove bags of ice in, and then they'll hang them up by their rear legs, as most of us do when we've got a deer field dressed and we've got it. And all that water from that ice will drain down into the head, and it will swell a deer's head up 3 or 4 times the size of what it was before. Wow. It's not, it doesn't ruin it if it's taken care of soon enough, but it does make for a serious mess. And, you know, this is just overall care of your deer to even get it to the processor. You put a gallon jug of frozen water, of ice in there, and as it slowly starts to work itself thawed, it's still contained. So you put 1 or 2 of those in a deer, wrap it in a tarp, take a tarp with you, a heavy canvas tarp if you can, and you've essentially built yourself a cooler for that animal. And, you know, it's going to keep it chilled to a point where, you know, depending on the ambient temperature of the air, you could buy yourself a day or 2 before you have to get it to a processor or a cooler or somebody that's going to keep it chilled like that. So that block ice, that's a big one. And just being able to have it, we don't even recommend you hang a deer up. If you got a field dress, you got block ice in it, you got it wrapped up, just leave it lay on a concrete floor out of the sun. It'll keep it cool. That's going to enable you to get it where you need to get it and be in the best shape that it can be in.
And one thing I want to mention, maybe everybody's aware of this, but when you're field dressing, you don't want to open that hide all the way up to the neck or something, right? You want to stop at the like that sternum bone, right?
Right, absolutely. That. Yeah, that's what I would recommend to anybody is just, you know, when you field dress, you know, you want to keep that cut minimal. For a shoulder mount, you know, we take down a lot further than you would think. So you definitely don't want to get into that brisket area. That's another one of those things that, you know, we'll get a lot of deer that guys will take clear up into the brisket. And as long as that cuts straight, it can be repaired. But, you know, we're talking about things here that you want to do because you want that mount to be the best one that it can possibly be. So the less sewing, the better, of course. So you're 100% right. You get up to that brisket, that chest bone, the sternum plate, and that's where you want to stop and, you know, kind of reach up in there and get what you need to get out without going much further than that.
All right. So we're keeping in early season when it's got the potential to be warm, or even like you said, if it's a warm gun season.
Right.
Biggest concern is getting it cooled down without soaking it in ice water.
Yes. Yeah, you definitely don't want it to get any more saturated than it has to be. And as I had stated about the block ice and the surface area and everything, I mean, it's just going to work better for you because it's not going to melt as quickly. And it lasts so much longer. It's reusable. Then you can refreeze it. It just comes down to having the opportunity to be able to do that. You know, just make a little bit of extra room in your freezer. If you can do 1 or 2 gallons before you're going to go on the hunt, and then just throw them in the cooler and take it with you. And that's really a practice that would apply not even to just taxidermy, but just to hunting in general. Something that I recommend guys do. I mean, you're going to, you know, keep your deer much better and reduce the risk of spoiling if you do that.
Okay. So are there any recommendations or best practices for getting a deer out of the woods? Are you risking doing any harm by dragging the deer, or are there any concerns there?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. And we get a lot We get a lot of deer every year that were drug excessively rough on the shoulder area, across rocks, hard ground, or, even the concrete or the gravel driveway once you get it out of the woods. And what'll happen is the hair, as I'm sure you know, that especially in the late season, a deer's hair is actually hollow. So once they get broken off at that point and some of that blood starts to absorb in there, it's going to be very noticeable in the mount. And that's one of the things that, even though we can go ahead and do the mount on your deer, that's seriously going to negatively affect the quality of the mount. It's going to be something that's going to be noticeable. So that's where that tarp can come into play. Even if you wrap the deer in the tarp and drag it out that way, using a cart is obviously a great idea. Putting it on the ATV, you never want to put a rope around their neck. That's a big thing.
Okay.
Once that rope burns into that hair and breaks that hair, that line is there. It's not coming out, and it will be noticeable. So, just avoid, even if you're strapping them down to the quad, getting straps too tight anywhere up above the shoulders. Just take as good a care to keep the hair pattern, which flows from, the head back to the shoulders on a deer. Just keep that hair pattern intact and just keep it away from anything that's going to cause it undue stress.
Okay. Is dirt or mud any kind of a concern, or does that kind of wash out pretty easily in the tanning process?
Yeah, most of the time you can brush that out. It washes out. If we get one that's exceptionally bad, we can wash the hide in Dawn dish soap before we go through the process of preserving and mounting it, to get that kind of stuff out. Blood is not good. So if you got rags, you got access to water, you can keep that stuff out of the hair. Just wipe it down, keep it wiped out. For the most part, it will come out too. Like I said, as long as the actual structure of that hair is intact, most of that stuff is just, you can take care of that pretty easily.
Okay. Now, is there, and I know you can't speak for all taxidermists, but is there ever a scenario where the hunter has abused the hide enough to where a taxidermist is just going to say, I'm sorry, but I just can't fix this. I guess obviously if you cut it all up real bad, right, there's no sewing it back together, but I guess, have you guys ever said to a potential customer, like, I'm sorry, but this thing is just in too bad a shape, we can't do anything with it?
It happens all the time. I mean, that's
okay.
It's very common for that to happen. I mean, without getting too specific on the story, a gun season here about 10 years ago, we had a guy bring us a deer, and it was an exceptionally warm gun season. I think it was, highs over 60 almost every day of the season. And it was the last day of season, and he brought us just a beautiful buck. I mean, it was a perfectly typical 12-point, and then it had matching drop tines on both sides. I mean, it was one of the nicest deer that we had. And he brought it in already, the deer was skinned, so it was just a head with the hide attached in a garbage bag. And as soon as he sat it down on the shop floor, we knew. I mean, it was rotten. And we asked him when he had killed the deer, and he had shot it on the first day of gun season and driven around with it in the back of his van all week long. And it was rotten. Now, what we do and what a lot of taxidermists do is, obviously we're going to inform the customer of the situation, but we are fortunate with our business that we work with a lot of local processors, and if they get a buck in that their customer is not going to have mounted, and they know that, then we will go and we will skin that head for a mount. We will cape that deer out, and we take all the measurements and we file it as, the guy that harvested it per the state records that we need with his tag number and everything. But we can use that as an extra cape. We can replace the hide on that deer if the customer so chooses.
Okay.
So that option does exist. Now, you'll hear guys talk about, oh, well, maybe I could just use this doe that I killed, and that does not work. One of the measurements that we take on a buck to make sure that we get the right size form for the deer is around the neck, at the jawline, directly behind the ears. And a good 3.5-year-old Ohio buck will average during the rut 21 inches around that measurement. Probably the biggest doe that I've ever seen at that same time of year might be 14 inches. So,
oh wow, yeah,
so that
big difference.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. But you know, in our business, and I know other taxidermists around do the same thing, and you just legally obtain those hides during the season. Now, we see 200 plus deer a year through our shop, and to me, I notice more so the different features in the face of a deer than anything. But as far as the hair patterns go, the amount of white in their muzzle, where the black is, things like that are things that I tend to notice. But as a customer, if circumstances beyond your control or just, neglect happen, the option exists to still get that animal mounted, and it's still going to be your antlers, and nobody that ever comes in is going to know that it's not the hide that came off of that deer.
Sure.
So that option absolutely exists, and that's definitely something that we have to do, at least a few times a year.
Okay. Well, that's good for us hunters to know. Don't
Right.
screw it up.
Right, yeah. You don't want to, but in a worst case scenario, and another instance where I can tell you that definitely comes into play is, say you made a marginal shot and it's 3 or 4 days before you find that deer, which is a terrible scenario for any of us, but it does happen. And whether the coyotes have gotten to it or the weather was just too bad, for it to still be intact at that point, you go ahead and you tag that deer and you have that set of antlers, and, I hunted this deer for 2 or 3 years, or I've got this story, I've got this history with it. I still want to put it on the wall in that way. That option does exist.
I want to pause here briefly to talk about our sponsor, Mastin's Deer Sense. So Mastin's Deer Sense is a premium scent company, deer scent company. And I say they're a premium deer scent company because one of the things they do to ensure high quality product is they collect all of their scents on stainless steel. So a lot of the other scent companies will actually collect on concrete. And so you get, if you know anything about concrete can be porous, and you can get a lot of impurities and off scents and weird things in it. The other thing is, because they're small, the deer aren't accustomed to these scents, right? I think I have a hunch that a lot of the big name popular scents get used so much that the deer kind of get familiar with those scents and learn that that's not a deer, that's a hunter over there trying to smell like a deer. So that's another big benefit of them. And the thing that I like the most is the prices are really, really good. You're basically getting 4 ounces of Mastin scent for the price that you pay for 2 ounces of a lot of the other big name scents. So it's a high quality product, the price is good, and it's more of a specialty thing because it's not because they're not huge, right? That's, in my eyes, that's a benefit. So I'm really looking forward to trying some of their stuff this fall, and I hope you will too. They support the podcast, which allows us to continue to bring these episodes to you guys. So I would really appreciate it if you would check them out. If you're looking at using scents this fall, there'll be a link in the description, and you can buy right from their website, mastinsdeerscents.com. And now, back to the episode.
Another question I had, what if you have a marginal shot, or the only shot opportunity, you shoot it through the neck or straight into the chest? Is that something that you guys can repair, or does that kind of ruin it?
No, that's I would say 95% of the time that's repairable. Okay. Particularly during firearm season, you get a lot of deer that are shot forward of the shoulders, and they've got a slug hole in them. And to be completely honest, as far as sewing goes, it's actually easier to repair a broadhead hole in the neck than it is a shotgun slug, because the shotgun slug is round, so you actually have to cut it into a football shape so that it doesn't pucker at the ends when you sew it, whereas a broadhead hole can literally just be pieced back together. And you just sew it up the exact way it went in, and you're none the wiser. It just comes down to making sure that, and, you got to be good at sutures to hide that kind of stuff. But it absolutely, you haven't ruined a deer if you make that shot, that hits forward of the shoulders. We can work with that almost every scenario.
Okay. So we talked about warm, and you mentioned freezing temperatures. So are there concerns or things that you need to be taking into account if the deer has a potential to freeze or the hide has a potential to freeze before you can get it to a taxidermist?
I will just say that that's kind of a scenario that's out of your hands. Take care of the field dressing, maybe just kind of get it positioned before it freezes in a way that's easy for you to transport. In our particular business, we will offer skinning services when needed. If you have a whole deer and you don't have a processor to take it to, you're not comfortable doing the skinning yourself, we have a facility where we can skin. And if we get one that's late like that and it's frozen in the legs or it's frozen solid, we literally will just bring it in the shop and let it thaw for however long it takes before we skin it out. And that's what I would hope that a processor would do if you took it to a good processor, because skinning a frozen deer for a mount skinning a frozen deer in general is next to impossible. But, to do it for a mount, particularly without cutting into the hide and doing damage like that, is difficult. So, aside from, taking it in the cabin with you at night when you're done with the hunt, there's really not a lot you can do with that other than just, like I said, trying to make sure that you get it somewhere as soon as possible to get it taken care of.
Okay. So, and maybe this is, I'm going to go there. I was going to, we talked about skinning there. We mentioned that's what spurred this thought. So are there, when you're skinning a deer, say, because what we typically do is get the deer quartered up, skin them out, quarter them up, get them in a cooler, get the meat in a cooler. Right. And then when we get them back home from the cabin or whatever, we either take the meat to a processor or do the processing ourselves.
Right.
When you're skinning, I know there's things that you can do wrong, but the question I'm having, or I want to ask you is, can you, when pulling on the hide, can you stretch the hide or throw the hide out of dimensions or anything like that? Is there any concern of pulling too hard on the hide, aside from ripping the hide, but can you stretch the hide or do something to it there while you're skinning?
Yeah, you're not going to do any damage that way. I mean, if you're, if it's separating from the body of the deer when you're pulling, you're not damaging the hide. I'm sure you've skinned plenty of deer, and that you'll meet with resistance before you'll do that damage, and you'll have to get the knife out. The big thing is just cutting holes. You want to be extra cautious if you're skinning the deer yourself, that you don't cut any holes, because like I said, they can be sewn, of course, but we're here to discuss the best ways to make that thing look as good as it possibly can. And, we're trying to avoid all of that type of stuff. So it's just be cautious with your knife. We might as well just go ahead and segue into that. And let's just say that you are going to skin the deer yourself for a shoulder mount. It really isn't that difficult. If you've ever skinned a deer, you can skin one for a shoulder mount. There are just a few really basic steps, and I think I can explain them in an audio format where the listeners will understand. But if not, and I've never checked, and it's been my intention to make one for the last few years, but I haven't, but to make a YouTube video to explain this. And I'm sure there are hundreds of them out there. I've never really looked, but to just go ahead and explain as we're here, talking. We discussed not going up past that sternum plate, the chest bone, when we're doing the field dressing. So when we are skinning a deer for a shoulder mount, what we want to do is on the front legs of the deer, between the knee joint and the hoof. So, about halfway down the leg to the hoof, you're going to want to make an incision all the way around there on both front legs. And then you're going to look, if you've ever looked at a deer, and if not, the next time you get one down, just take a look at it. They have almost every deer, unless, of course, it's like a piebald or an albino, which would be the exception of the rule. The hair on the inside of the front legs is white. And then, of course, it's like the natural tannish brown on the outside. And that hair meets at the very back of the front leg, facing the rear of the animal. So we've made that cut below the knee, around the leg, and then we're going to just follow that hair pattern, that difference in the hair color, down the front leg of the deer, right into its armpit, and then we're just going to make a V cut back to where we stopped at field dress on both sides. Okay. So now we've done that. Now we've separated, the back, the rear legs, whatever you do back there, that's fine. Just leave the whole hide intact. Go ahead and hang it up. We talked about pulling it down. You can pull it down past that point now and just carefully skin down. This is one of those things where you would want to talk to your taxidermist beforehand, but in our line of work, the type of measurements that we take are off of the head of the deer itself. And like I said, that one around the base of the neck. So we only need 3 or 4 inches of neck meat in there. So the further down you can get it skinned to that neck without cutting any holes, only go as far as you're comfortable, and then just go ahead and remove that. Now you've got the head and the whole hide, and you've got those front legs skinned down. The worst thing you can do is go straight across the inside of the legs and just meat like a T, like you would skin a cow if you were a butcher. What you've done there is you've essentially severed the back of the armpit off, and that actually is part of the mount, even though it might not look up like it when you're skinning. And once that is gone, then there's not much you can do. You've cut it too short.
Okay, so I got a follow-up question there. So you said when you're dealing with the head, right? You've got it skinned down. Mm-hmm. You want to have a few vertebrae left on there so that you can get that neck dimension. That you don't want to take it all the way up to where the last vertebrae meets the skull.
Yes, exactly. And we deal with a couple processors that's just how they do it. They take it all the way to the skull and they take it right at the vertebrae, which, hey, props to them, because that means they're really good at what they do and they're maximizing their product for their customer. And there are ways that we can kind of guesstimate that measurement based on, what the other measurement we take is from the tip of the deer's nose before it's skinned to the front corner of its eye, like to its tear duct. Based on that measurement, we can kind of get a pretty good idea of what size this deer's neck was to get the proper form for it. But, without that few inches, it's not going to be as accurate, but we can still get it done. And like I said, other taxidermists, there are other measurements that form companies use, but they always seem to fall in line with those first 2 measurements that I had mentioned. But, your taxidermist might want more neck. So that's one of those things that goes back to once you find that guy, you find out what he wants.
Okay, so that's one area where on mine I screwed up because I took it all the way down and I had no vertebrae left. I took it all the way down and severed it where that last vertebrae met the skull.
Right.
So I made it harder and like I said in the beginning of this, I had no planning. I didn't even have I was calling around like, oh, you got any availability? Can you do it?
Right.
Can you do a mount,
Right.
So, okay, that's good advice. So around the lower leg, follow the white to brown hair line up into the armpit and then V into where the field dress incision ended.
Back towards the field dress, back towards, like the deer's stomach area.
Okay. So another question about the neck. How do you guys, when you're doing the caping,
mm-hmm.
you want some of that neck left on there? Are you actually cutting in and just using a knife to separate those vertebrae, or are you using a saw? How are you making that cut through the meat then at that point, once you've got it skinned out?
So we use scalpels, with throwaway blades. To make sure, and I can, get a couple heads out of a scalpel blade, but that's just an aside for how I try and save money where I can. But what we do is we make it's like a Y-shaped incision from the base of each antler once we've taken our measurements, and then we just follow that just far enough back to be able to actually clear the hide around the backside of the deer's head, and then take it down from there towards the mouth and the nose and take it off that way. So once we do the mount, Part of the process is you have the form, you fit the antlers on there, make sure that they're right the way you want them. Then you actually take them back off, you pull the hide on, put the antlers back in there, and then you sew that incision up. Now, we have some tricks of the trade that we do to make sure that that incision stays down and is not noticeable, even though it's on the back side of the head when you have a mount on the wall, but I won't divulge those secrets here.
Yeah. But so, fair enough. I guess I was more asking, how do you get the head off of the deer?
Okay. All right. Let me backtrack then, and I'll explain that a little more clearly. Okay. So behind the ears, base of the antlers. All right. So we're going to make an incision, and it's going to be a Y towards the back, towards that vertebrae where the skull meets the vertebrae. We're making a Y, like a line from each antler. Okay. And then we're going to take that line down, like following the spine, until we clear where you cut that deer off when you skinned it.
Okay.
All right. Now you're skinning around the neck, you're skinning down the inside of the ears, and you've actually created an opening to where you can bring the skull out the back of that incision as you skin down towards the nose and the mouth. Okay, so now you've actually pulled it out the back of the hide.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You following me? Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's just a small incision. If you've only left a vertebrae or two so we can get that measurement, we can keep that incision around 6 inches. But that's enough of an opening that as we skin down through the bases of the ears and towards the back of the eyes, that you're just slowly working that hide down the skull towards the nose and the mouth until you've got the whole antlers, skull and all, right out the back of that hide.
Okay. Okay, so do you generally like that, because that part of the skinning I didn't do. Do you, because I was, you get into the ears and the eyelids and that kind of stuff, like I didn't want to fool with that. Is that generally what you recommend, unless somebody really knows what they're doing?
No, we want the hide with the head attached. That's how we want it. With that couple inches of neck to measure, with that we can get that head measurement. We want all that attached. That's something that we want to skin ourselves for sure, 100%. And then as an aside to that, actually this year moving forward, I did it last year for the Division of Wildlife. Because of the concern of chronic wasting disease in Ohio, they have been reaching out to processors and taxidermists across the state, and they've been having us take samples. We're actually removing the lymph nodes from inside the neck, just under the jaw, and we're identifying that animal and where it was harvested and who harvested it and everything with the consent of the hunter, and preserving it. And their biologists have been taking that and they've been testing around the state. I did 25 samples for them last year, and I'm going to do as many as I can possibly do for them this year. So I need that head. I need everything intact with that few inches in order to do that. And I would encourage any of your listeners out there that are going to take a buck this fall. They want bucks. But, if you can find somebody that's going to do that kind of sampling, this is something that we're all in it together to try and keep out of the state, or at least keep minimized once it does get here. And, this is the first line of defense. So, but that's just another reason why I want that whole head and neck, because if I can get the hunter to consent to let me take those samples and give them to the Division of Wildlife, hopefully we never hear from them again about it, because it came back negative, which is what we all want to hear. But, in the instance that it does get into the wild population, we obviously want to know as soon as possible.
Now that leads me to two questions. If somebody wanted to say they're not having a mount done, but they want to help the cause, is there a DNR resource that people could say, hey, I'd like to submit my deer for sampling, or would they just bring it to a taxidermist that is participating in that and have them take that lymph node out but not do the mount? Is there a way for somebody that's not having a mount done to participate in that?
I guess my recommendation for that, because I can't give you the specific answer, would just be to contact your district wildlife office. Our case is District 3 in Portage Lakes. I would call them and talk to a biologist, because I do think that they do. They are willing to do sampling. I know last year we had a customer. It was after I had got my 25 samples that they wanted, but we had a guy locally in Medina County who was a biology teacher, and he knew about this chronic wasting disease sampling. And he was very emphatic that he wanted his deer tested because he actually wanted to make it part of his biology curriculum at his high school, which I thought was fantastic. So he specifically, and he wanted the buck mounted, but he actually called them to find a taxidermist in the area that was doing the sampling so that he could take it specifically to them. And he ended up bringing it to us. So, so we've dealt with that, but if it's just a deer, like I said, I know they were working with taxidermists and processors. So, perhaps there's a processor out there that you could find, or they would just tell you to bring it to one of them or send a biologist out. I can't give you a concrete answer on that, but your local district wildlife office would definitely be the best place to contact for that. Okay.
So then my second question related to that is, in these, because they've had some of these surveillance areas, if a guy, where they've got some testing requirements, if a guy shoots a deer in that area, how does that work? If they take it, because I'm kind of, I guess I don't know really what I'm asking, because I've not taken one to have it sampled, but I know they're going to cut into the neck to get the lymph node out. I guess maybe the way that would work is they would take it to a taxidermist within that sampling area, and the taxidermist would handle that. Or can you guys repair that incision where the DNR has taken a sample if they take it through the hide?
Hey, you're digging deep here. That's an excellent question, and that's not a scenario that I've come across. I think it's only been a couple years that they've had these mandatory testing areas, and it hasn't fallen into our lap where we've had one that actually came out of that area. So I don't know what their protocol is for that, where they have the mandatory testing, if it was a deer that you want to get mounted. I certainly, if I were the hunter and I had a deer that I wanted to take to the taxidermist, would, be pretty hesitant to let them make those kind of cuts where they need to make them to get those lymph nodes out. Okay. Because it would be extremely difficult to repair an incision right there at the throat. So I'm assuming they have something set up. And that's another one of those things where if you're in that surveillance area and it's mandatory and you kill a deer that you want, contact your district office, contact your local game warden, and find out how they do that before it even becomes an issue, would be my recommendation.
Yeah, Jason, I believe you have to still take your deer to the check station, and then they give you a receipt that you have to take to your taxidermist. They don't do anything there, but they give you a receipt to take to your taxidermist that tells your taxidermist that they have to remove those lymph nodes and leave them, basically call the ODNR to come pick them up.
Okay.
Well, there you go. That sounds like a good solution to that problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, that works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and then I guess the other maybe cut, maybe we talked about it, maybe we didn't, but we've made, down the legs into the armpit, back to the field dressing incision. Right. And then I guess from there you can go around the rest of the body then and start skinning the hide down.
Yeah, and I recommend that, don't try and cut the back half off and think that you've left enough for a shoulder mount, because it does take more. So skin the whole deer down from the rear legs all the way, and then, make that neck cut and just bring the whole thing to your taxidermist. Let them take it off where they need to take it off.
Okay.
We get a lot of them that the guys will, they'll do a good job skinning it, but then once it's off of the deer and it's just laying there, it's very deceptive what is where anatomically, and it's best just to let us take what we need and, bring the whole hide to us.
Okay. So the other thing that I guess I didn't do wrong, but I made it harder on myself because I didn't know what I was doing, was I didn't I thought you made the incision at that hairline, but I wasn't sure what to do in the armpit. And so I ended up skinning the hide down, taking the shoulders off, and basically taking the shoulder out of the hide like a sock. Like I didn't split that leg, you know, and it made a bunch more work for me, but I was nervous that I was going to screw it up.
Yeah, you just made things harder on yourself. You didn't do anything to hurt the deer for the mount. I mean, that's another option that you could go with, but I mean, you can attest then if you did it that way. And we get several a year that guys do that way because they're afraid of screwing that hide up. And obviously you've obviously protected that in terms of cutting anything off that shouldn't be cut off. But yeah, that's a lot of work to do it that way. So
yes, it is.
Yep.
Yes, it is. Especially if it's cold and stiff at all, it just you really bite with it.
We've gotten deer in before where the guys were so afraid to make any incision where they would actually separate the front shoulder at the shoulder blade and bring us a skinned deer with the whole front quarters essentially.
Oh, wow.
Hide. So, then you're in a situation where like, well, just wait here, buddy. I'll go ahead and give you these quarters because you don't want to waste that meat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Appreciate you being cautious, but once again, you've made a lot of extra work for yourself. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, say you make a cut and don't leave you enough hide, then what? Is that where you go and get, a hide from another deer from a processor, or then is it a neck mount, or, what are your options then?
A neck mount is an option. They still make them on a personal preference level. I just don't think they look nearly as good as a full shoulder mount. But like I said, that all comes down to personal preference. We have some guys that actually like the neck mounts, and that's okay because it's whatever the guy wants. Depending on how they have done the damage or where the cut is, like I said, some things can be repaired, but might be slightly noticeable. There's a threshold where we just won't do it, of course, because it's not, even if we could do it, we won't, because it's not going to reflect the quality of work that we like to put out. But some things can be pieced back together, and then some things, it's time to discuss putting a spare hide on it. It just depends. If the pieces, most of the time what we tell a guy, the biggest area to screw up is in those armpits around the brisket. And, most of the time we tell the guys, if the pieces are still there, we can put them back together. Depending on the thickness of the hide, the hair, what time of season it is, the incision might not be as easy to hide, but if you're adamant that you want your hide back on your deer and it's all there, it can be sewn. But most of the time, if it's cut off, we'll get you a spare cape. So.
Okay. So we've basically gotten the hide safely and in good shape to the taxidermist now. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, because this was another thing that caught me off guard in my experience, was so you've got some choices to make when you get to the taxidermist, right? There's
choices. Which
way do you want the deer to be looking? You've got all these different poses and things, and so can you kind of talk us through that, or how do you, when a customer walks into your shop, how do you help guide them through that decision? Because it's again, I hadn't even thought about it. I walked in there and it was like, well, what style mount do you want? And it was like, I don't know. What are my choices? And so they've got posters and catalogs and, or the display room, and got some decisions to make. So how do you help people make those decisions?
What we like to do, obviously, we have the showroom, and, we've tried to do basically every position that we offer as far as, there are the turns like you had mentioned, but there's also neck position, full upright like an alert deer, semi-sneak, which is kind of down, full sneak, which would be straight out, and then you've got the turns. You have your choice in how you want the ears. If you've ever watched a deer in the field, their ears are never in the same position at any given time unless they're at full alert. So you've got the forward ears, the back ears, there's aggressive ears, there's there's so many different options as far as stuff like that goes. For the customer, the first thing we ask them is if they know where they're going to hang the deer. Depending on what wall you're putting it on and what room, that has a lot to do with which way you would want it turned. I try and keep my heads in my showroom facing the entrance. So, if they're on the right wall when you come in the room, you want them turned to their left. So they're kind of looking towards that entryway. That's not always necessarily the case, though, because say you have a couple of bookend deer that you've got hanging, over, I'll say a fireplace, but we'll get into that later about why you shouldn't do that. But, say you've got them hanging on a wall in a cabin that's kind of a centerpiece and you want them turned facing each other. That's an option. There are aggressive forms where they kind of have their head down like they're posturing to fight. There's so many different things. We just, like I said, we try and ask the customer, where are you going to hang it? Maybe what was that deer doing right before you took it? Does that play into how you want it positioned? And my personal preference, and I will tell guys this, is I'm just not a fan of the just full alert looking straight on, because as a taxidermist, to me, that just looks like a deer mount. And our job is to try and make them look like they are alive on the wall. So putting a little bit of a turn to it, a little bit of a tilt to the head, cocking one ear back maybe, or both, or, just little variations like that, give it more of a lifelike appearance. But if a guy says, nope, it's going right in the center of the wall in my hunting cabin, and I've had that spot picked out for years, and I want it straight up with ears forward, that's fantastic. That's an excellent choice.
Okay.
That's personal preference stuff, but like I said, there's just a little bit to it in terms of if you know where it's going or what you want to do with it, or how you envision that deer. We'll try and help you look at options that make it come to life in the way that you think that it should look. And the best way to do that is just to have examples in front of the customer, which is what we try and do.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned, which way was the deer, or how was it standing, or whatever. How do you remember it in the field before the shot or whatever? Because that's actually what my father-in-law does. He said, I like to do them, if they were looking to the right when I shot them, that's like I want to sort of remember that snapshot, and I thought, that's kind of an interesting, because again, after my sort of deer in the headlights, like, I don't know which way I want it to look at, it was, he offered that up. I said, that's kind of an interesting idea, that's kind of cool. But yeah. Okay. So now I'm curious, you mentioned the fireplace. What are the concerns with hanging a mount near a fireplace?
Okay. Yeah. All right. So we've gone through all of these steps here. You've taken it, it's mounted, it's ready to come home. You picked out your mount, taxidermist calls, it's done. It's time to go get it. How do we keep it looking as good as we can for as long as we can? Like I had stated at the beginning of our conversation, we've got mounts that we did when we first got into business that I would defy anybody to identify as older than the ones that we did last year. And that comes down to how, you as the hunter, the harvester of the deer, the holder of the trophy, are going to take care of it once you get it home. And the recommendations that we give to every customer as they walk out of our shop is, for one, avoid when you're transporting it doing anything that will disrupt the patterns of the hair as they are on the mount. We talked a little bit ago about a deer's hair being hollow, and if you're handling it too aggressively, or you just grab it by the neck, you squeeze it, you thrust it up into the car or something like that, that hair breaks off, that hollow hair breaks backwards. It's difficult, if not impossible, to get it to lay back down properly once it's set on the shoulder mount. So we carry them by the antlers. We'll give them a guide point down around the brisket, and we carry them that way. We lay them down on the back when we're transporting them. Just get them home that way. Obviously, some hair is going to get a little bit disrupted. Once we get it up on the wall, a damp cloth, just damp with water, and you just follow the hair patterns and you wipe it down. That's the same thing that we recommend for as far as keeping it clean goes. Obviously, this is something that's going to collect dust and cobwebs. It's just a natural magnet for those kinds of things. And it's just that damp cloth, and you just follow those hair patterns. But getting back to the fireplace, the two biggest killers of the longevity of a shoulder mount are ultraviolet light and smoke. There's literally nothing we can do to keep a deer looking good years and years down the road if it's subjected to the smoke from a fireplace, whether you're a smoker or not, or if it hangs somewhere where it's getting a lot of direct sunlight through a window day in, day out. It's going to fade. There's nothing you can do to stop that. So, those are the kinds of things to bear in mind beforehand. If you're going to put a deer on the wall, you might want to look at a spot and say, okay, this is the spot. Huge drastic variations in the relative humidity of the room. They won't necessarily destroy one, but they could cause, some shrinking, some cracking in certain areas if they're subjected to that. But yeah, the smoke, the sunlight, those are definitely things that you want to avoid. And then just keeping it clean with that rag. We use a product. I will give away a little tip here that, is a trick of the trade, but I'll go ahead and share that. We use a product called Cowboy Magic, and they used to market it as a taxidermist product called Taxidermy Magic, but now it's just the Cowboy Magic, and you can find it, I believe, in most tack shops. What it is it's for spraying show horses. They spray them down with this. It's just in a spray bottle. You spray it on a show horse. It gives them a nice sheen, a real lively look, and it's kind of a dust repellent. So as part of our finishing process, every deer before we send it out, we spray down and brush that stuff in there real good. So it makes it that much easier to keep the dust off of it when you go to wipe it down, but it's a readily available product. And if a guy out there's got a mount that he wants to kind of revitalize a little bit, it's easy to find, and you're not going to hurt the mount. Just go out there, spray it down, always be wiping with those hair patterns, and then it'll give an old mount new life.
Is that safe to put on the antlers as well?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Okay. And I do. I spray it. I spray the hide. I spray the antlers. I work it into the antlers real good. It gives them a nice, kind of looks like they just got done rubbing type deal. It doesn't overly shine them to where they look like they're varnished or polyurethane or anything like that, because you definitely don't want that. But it just, it gives it takes away that dullness that comes with not being used anymore.
So that would I'm thinking that might be a good sort of pro tip for sheds too. If you had, sheds that you want to kind of revitalize, that would work for those as well.
Yeah, it absolutely would. You could spray down your sheds with that and wipe them down, and that would help, keep them from getting that dull look.
Okay. So that's the where to put them and how to care for them at home. That's one thing I've done right. It's mine is in my finished basement, so it's out of the UV, and it's nowhere near. We don't smoke. It's nowhere near the fireplace, so I got a gold star for that.
Yes, there you go. That's where I'm. Like I told you, that's where I'm sitting right now. That's my showroom. I've got 6 of my heads down here. And, they keep looking great because they're just not exposed to those harsh outdoor elements or the smoke or things that can get to them that do that damage.
Awesome. So you said when you're bringing them home, it's safe to carry them by the antlers then? Those are on there securely enough at that point to carry them by the antlers? Okay. Yeah,
any form manufacturer, no matter who you use, what the form is just, here's a little bit of that behind the scenes stuff for you. It's not styrofoam, but it is a foam, a urethane based foam. And they actually put a plate, a plywood, heavy plywood, and it's built into the mount. It's molded around it. So it's in there. And that's what you attach the antler cap to, because the skull is not used. The skull plate is used. The antlers are still attached to the skull plate. But you don't actually use the skull. But it's buried down in there to where it can take the full weight of that mount. And, a mount is not that heavy because you're talking about that urethane foam and that hide. So another hanging tip, once you get it home, and your taxidermist will tell you what they recommend you do. But as long as you find a stud and you've got like a 2.5-inch drywall screw in there and they use a good quality hanger on the back of it, That's all you need.
Okay.
So yeah, you carry it by those antlers and keep your hands away from that hair in the neck area so you don't do any damage to that. Once you get it home, get it hung up, get the hair set with that damp rag, and you're good to go.
Awesome. Well, this has been a really, really good conversation. I've learned a handful of things, and I'm sure our listeners are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you again.
Good. Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Like I said, I really appreciate it. And to me, it's about just sharing the word and trying to make sure that everybody gets the best product they can. And, that, like I told you on the phone earlier, we're all in this together as sportsmen, and, we've got to look out for each other no matter what we're doing, whether it's in the field or in the taxidermy shop or at the processor. We're a brotherhood, and we have to take care of each other. I believe that strongly.
Hear, hear.
Yep.
Yeah. So we mentioned it at the beginning, Kisamore's Back to Nature Taxidermy.
Yep.
I know you said you got plenty of work, but if people are interested and they want to bring a deer to you, how do they get in contact with you? What's the best way to get your info?
You can find us on Facebook at Kisamore's Back to Nature Taxidermy would be the best way. Aside from that, we're just a word of mouth here in Northeast Ohio in Portage County. We keep business cards in the local processors and shops. If you're in this area and you've got a friend that's got a mount, chances are he probably might know who we are, because like I stated, this has been a family business for 25 years. My mom and dad are both retired from full-time jobs, and I still work a full-time job, and we do it together. We have almost like an assembly line type process to how we do it, and we are able to take those 200 deer that we do and we turn them around in 3 to 5 months every year. And, some guys will tell you, well, that's too fast. They can't be doing good work. But like I said, because we're working so many hours through the winter, and each one of us has kind of our own area expertise, and we kind of keep each other in check, and we can kind of pick things that, the other ones missed maybe, and we're all specializing in something. It's like an assembly line, and we keep moving. We don't stop working from the time season opens until we've got the last head out the door. In my mind, my philosophy is no guy should have to wait while he's hunting. He shouldn't be sitting in the tree stand wondering if his buck from the last year is done. That's our philosophy. But we also still want to put out the highest quality product that you can find anywhere, and I feel really good that we do. And the number of repeat customers that we have year after year, and the fact that our word of mouth business keeps us as busy as we can possibly be, I think kind of reflects that. So.
Yeah, you just blew my mind with that 3 to 5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. We take them, we try and do them as what we do is through the rut, through gun season, we are strictly in receiving mode. We are taking those deer in. We are processing paperwork. We're making sure that hides get stored properly, with that customer's name, the antlers get put where they need to be. But once we get through that rush of gun season, it's time to get the first load of forms, and we start cranking deer out. Usually, sometimes I will admit that depends on whether or not my dad and I have our buck tags filled, how soon we get to working on them. But hey, we're all hunters.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's I'm sort of sitting here in shock because mine, they told me 12 to 14 months, and it ended up being closer to 2 years on mine.
Yeah,
it's like, I don't know if I'm ever getting this thing back.
Yeah.
Our goal every year is to be done and have them all out of the shop by roughly the 1st of June. My dad, who, like I said, is retired from a full-time construction job, is a big-time Lake Erie walleye fisherman. And once he gets the itch to be on the lake, he wants to be done with the deer. And it's summertime. You don't want to be in the shop working. And that's why, that's another thing that enables us to do that is we are pretty specific to game heads. We'll do a few elk every year, maybe a moose here or there, depending on what we get, and a mule deer. But we focus. We've done the full body coyotes. I've done just about anything that is a North American mammal at some point or another. But like I said, the fact that this is kind of a project of passion for us, we're good at whitetails, and we just try and stick to that.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, this is.
And I encourage you guys to come visit us. Like I said, I know we're not too far from where you are, and once the rut's in full swing and we start getting some really impressive heads coming through the shop, our doors are open, and you're more than welcome to come pay us a visit.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. We'll have to swing by and say, hey, that would be cool. So, all right. Well, again, thank you. This has been really good. I know our listeners are going to get a lot of value out of this. So thank you.
Good. That was my goal. So I hope I achieved it.
Awesome. Well, take care and good luck this season.
Okay. Same to you guys.
All right. So there you have it. Like I said, I learned a lot in this one. I really enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank Dustin again for taking time to talk to us and bringing us this content. I think it'll help people, help hunters get good quality taxidermy, whether you're using their shop, Back to Nature Taxidermy, or any other shop, right? There's information in this episode that will help you, regardless of who you use, help you find a good taxidermist and get the most out of your product, because taxidermy is not cheap, and you want to get a good product. You want to have a good end result, and you want to preserve that memory and that hunt and that animal as best as you can. So thank you, Dustin, and hopefully you guys, if you're in the area and you're looking for taxidermy, you'll check them out. Another request I'll make is share this with your friends. So if they're not already following Ohio Huntsman, tell them they should be, and send this episode to them, because like I said, there's information in there for everybody. If they're a hunter and they've ever thought about taxidermy, this episode is for them. So share it with your friends. Take a screenshot of you listening to this, when you're listening on your phone. Take a screenshot, share it to your Instagram story, tag us, share it to your Facebook feed, whatever. Tag us so that we know you enjoyed the content, and we would really appreciate that. We can repost that and let others know that you're enjoying that content, and that way the show continues to grow and we continue to reach more people and the community continues to grow. So the only other thing I'll ask is check out our website, ohiohuntsman.com. That's where all of our content is housed now, and follow us on both Facebook and Instagram. We are Ohio Huntsman on Facebook and Ohio Huntsman _podcast on Instagram. Always posting new articles, things you guys need to know about, and just kind of fun goings-ons on Instagram stories. So check us out in all those places, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.